I am alone. These words resound and cascade with a depth of meaning that perhaps even the greatest philosophical minds of the ages often dared not tread due to the astounding implications of what this thought means in terms of the Absolute. The Absolute being the most significant topic that has captivated, enthralled, inspired, and obviously created rancor in the minds of mankind throughout the ages. God. God as absolute, without beginning nor end. Conceptually, it is practically impossible to even imagine this, for as Schopenhauer once said, every person takes the limits of their own field of vision for the limits of the world. How much more so then would we say we miss in regards to the unlimited? Is it a mistake to say that each individual is gifted with a small spark of perception in that singular viewpoint which is called perspective? A perspective that is a small piece of that absolute, a speck that has been taken or created from the all, but is not to be mistaken as the all. So mote it be. Though any of us may reason through a question or an inquiry, no one individual can encompass the entirety of all that is or ever will be, since that is a matter of capacity. Does a drop know it is in the ocean? And, just like the ocean, all drops are pulled back towards it, no matter how far they have strayed, but it is never the other way around. The drop in the ocean is consummate, but separated it becomes individualistic. It is no different if given the example of a conductor in an orchestra. All notes are drawn according to their measure, and each one has its coming and going upon the soundstage of its existence. All are accounted for. Is this why so many often feel that they are being played? If every one is an individual note, then who is the composer? What type of composition is this exactly? Without drawing any conclusions, and to potentially help us see the meaning of these questions, let us go back to the concept of God as absolute in the beginningless beginning and the endless ending. It is a state of nothing and yet everything. There is nothing to do because everything is already done. How does one begin at the end? How does anything end where it begins? In this state, there is the ultimate conundrum, because there is also nowhere to go. God is nowhere, now here, because God is also everywhere. Where does one go when they're everywhere? Nowhere. There is no time to chase, since God is also every when. There is no need for power, since all power is retained. God sees everything, since there is nothing to see. Hears everything, since there is nothing to hear. Feels everything, since there is nothing to feel, and controls everything because there is nothing to control. Infinite potentiality. Omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. The ultimate limit is also paradoxically the ultimate limitlessness. Yet, there is also no one else because God is alone, all one. Try your utmost to put your mind into a state where you are imagining being absolutely, without any chance of respite, completely alone, forever. Since there is no time and only time, forever is already in all ways encompassing you entirely. Aloneness is encompassing you entirely. But what exactly is forever? That concept cannot even be fathomed. How does one measure the measureless? If eternal life, how can it have a starting point? All beginnings are demarcated by their endings and vice versa, but how to set a boundary on the boundless? Is the problem of this seen in terms of those who are waiting for eternity to happen to them at some point in the future via certain concepts such as heaven in the afterlife? If the individual is going to exist eternally, then eternity has already begun at conception. Yet, the contradiction that bears down upon this thought is once again at the forefront, since to have a beginning or entrance in this conception means that there was a previous exit which took place, and back of that, there would have been another prior entrance, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. Where does this lead us to then? Nowhere, which is everywhere. How can one wait for eternity? If this were the case, the eternal would be something outside of you that would happen to you, and thus make it redundant, because it wouldn't be eternal at all, since eternity would by its very definition need to envelop all things in all ways, or it would by default be limited. If limited, this would also mean that it is not absolute, and if not absolute, it could not be God. Can it be seen now that through this limitation, the reasons why there can be so many individualistic concepts of God and variations which lead to divisional ideologies and religious denominations? It is limitation which enables the mind to say that, my God is a jealous God, or my God loves my people more than your people, and so on with any abstract idea the mind wishes to conjure to reflect personal desires or judgments. If God can be described, this means that God is founded upon limitations and borders. To scribe something is to mark an outline of it, and as soon as this is done, the aspect of absolute totality is destroyed. To divide God is to destroy God. Can it be seen now why there cannot be any outside saviors? Who or what is going to save you? A divided aspect of the all which carries its own agendas and desires? If it is God as absolute that saves you, then God would need to save everyone and everything all at once, or save nothing ever. If God is truly absolute, then God would only work in absolutes and not divisions, since divisions by their very nature are individualistic. Can the silliness be seen of attempting to draw a picture of God, or creating any type of imagery? If all creation is of God and comes from God, then to save or damn parts of said creation would also be to save or damn pieces of God itself. To create heavens or hells is to also create sectors, and within these sectors are the boundaries which create territoriality that leads to further complications of cultures including politics, military, rules, laws, and governance. When there are more additions, there is greater intricacy and therefore more problems. As a generality, it can be inferred that simplification is subtraction. Can this not be seen just through observation? What is more complex, a small group that lives in a rural setting, or New York City? Simplification is subtraction. On the other hand, if we go back to the law of analogy and use the metaphor of music, it can be seen that within a measure of music, the least complex state would be a rest. With each addition, whole note, half note, eighth, 16th, etc., creating more development and also consequently less space. This is certainly the reason that there is the word pace within space, since the pace is what creates the rate of movement, which can be likened to the rate of vibration. If a measure of music is metered out at the commonly used signature of 4/4 time, there is enough room for one whole note, or 2 half notes, or 4 quarter notes, and so on with each separate aspect of division that may be created within said measure. When the divisions increase, so does the tempo at which each note is to be played. 4 16th notes need to be played 4 times faster than 1 quarter note to equal the same duration of time within the measure itself. The math to fill one measure with 16ths equals 16 16th notes, or 4 quarter notes. The quicker the note, the shorter its lifespan, while of course the longer notes are able to be heard for a longer duration. The more intricate the measure, the harder it is to play. Too many notes in a measure leads to a cluttering or an offense, which could be likened to a trespass. There is only so much room between bars, measures, or suns, as the Hebrew bar means sun, with the phonetic interplay between the words giving the hint towards the musicality of the universe. When the measures become too full, there is an inevitable increase in sound or volume, since the volume is both the magnitude of sound and also the amount of space that can be occupied within a three-dimensional object. This is being shown in the symbol of recorded music with what is known as the loudness wars, where music is being mastered beyond its limitation, which leads to distortion or clipping. The loudness wars, as a symbolic reflection of the actuality of things, began to really make its mark right in line with the symbolic reflection of 9/11 and the bin Laden, or full bin, which is of course a measure that is at its capacity. When the volume is too loud, the vibrations distort, and to distort is to create a wrongdoing that manifests an action where damages can be brought upon the responsible party. This is shown in the word split of distort, with tort being a definition of law for said wrongdoing, and dis comes from the Latin meaning god of the underworld, who is also known as Pluto. The underworld is Plato's cave. The cave is an inference to the womb that we find ourselves in, which is the matrix. In the etymology of dis, it can be shown that this prefix also means apart and even two, indicating again a cause of separation and division. The phonetic of torsion, distortion, gives the meaning of an object that is in a state of being twisted, which is a hidden reference towards the torsion known as DNA. The matrix womb is the cave of the underworld matter, in the lowest dimension where the cycle of birth and rebirth occurs endlessly. This creates a quarantine, as shown directly in the etymology of the French word for 40, which is 40, that represents the 40 weeks of gestation, which is a number that is also heavily symbolized in the Bible for the same reason. Quarantine also carries the definition of a ship that is held in isolation from the shore, which furthermore links this to the aspect of commerce and the sea. The sea brings one to the womb, which is the mother of all formation. Woe be unto those who mock, ridicule, and treat this information as a joke. The matrix is admission inside of a group, such as a school, as shown in the term metric, which is an abbreviation of matriculation and is immediately related to the term matrix. If one were so inclined to dig into the situation, it is seen that all of the other relations to this word come from a foundation that means mother, and it is through the mother that all matter finds its birth. Math is a measurement of all things that matter. Mathematics is truly mothermatics. Matter is mater, which is material, and it is all from mother. Mother is also an anagram of thermo, which finds its meaning in heat, warmth, because all things that come to life from a mother need to be incubated. Each blow or tick from the hands of time wears us down completely, which is what it means to be beat. Every decade or 10 years, X leads to decay, or that which is decayed, decade. This creates the threshold for every new existence. The technologists that believe they will find immortality within the machine are fools at best. The geneticists that are tampering with the structure of DNA in their attempts at life extension have no idea of the fire they are playing with. There is a functioning system in this mystery that extends way beyond these desires to play God. There is no circumspection in these actions, and therefore the consequences of these actions will unfold in due course. Why is there no circumspection? Because this world is filled with a consciousness that reeks of insensitivity. The Greek cynics of old espoused in their observations that humanity is motivated wholly by self-interest, and perhaps within a decadent civilization that has fallen in love with itself through a selfie world culturalized by the dictates of Narcissus himself, the cynics may be more correct than not. This era is demarcated by the brand of onwards and forwards with everything, and be damned the consequences. It is apocalyptic thinking at its finest. To have sensitivity would mean to retain the ability to listen to all of the things that surround us. To do this, one must be silent, as its anagram of listen suggests. This means to shut out one's own desires and goals of advantage over others. This is impossible, however, when one exists in their mentality of isolated individualism that constantly reaffirms its own positions of superiority over as many others as can be achieved. Gross power in the battery state is hailed as primacy absolute. To take advantage over another is to take advantage over one's self. Can the inherent contradiction of this not be seen? The user is the used. Until this is seen, Silence is the order of the ages within the matrix mother, since to be mum is to be silent and secretive, and the informal term of mummy to indicate a mother is still retained to this day. That quote hands everyone the mystery. The aposiopasis at the end is a word from the Greek meaning to become silent. The Lord God saw that something had changed man, and something was to be done. The administration of silence was to be carried out. That silence was to be put into the womb matrix of mother matter to remain mum, silent. It is the consistent quarantine of 40 weeks in the rebirth chamber. Hence the prominence of this number throughout the Bible and its consistency with finding a new world or a promised land. Yet still, as close as we are to the revelation, the thickness of egotism and self-importance combined with all of its insensitivities will preclude any from realizing the mystery of why this is the way things are. Within the constitution of this change in man, or the atom, are all the indications that point towards the formation of something foreign and alien. It is a transfer of state. This change of state can of course be physical, but there is nothing to suggest that it couldn't also be mental, emotional, or spiritual in nature. Further meanings include making the changed entity the property of someone else through a transfer of sale, and to also remove and separate this changed entity from its potential origins. These indications and their implications are of essential importance, and once again link us within the world of commerce. Only something that feels divided from its natural state would ever conceptualize the need to be saved from its current state. And thus the synonymous aspect of salvation is redemption, which means to repurchase or buy back. If commerce and the notion of salvation have absolutely nothing in common, why are salvation and redemption tangent with each other? Furthermore, why is the number one defining aspect of sin known as debt? Why is the word sold exactly phonetically linked with sold? Why are denominations both religious and commercial? Why is the number one definition of credit known as faith? Why are the roots of salvation and salary both derived from salt? To pay something is to bring peace, as shown through the root of pay, from the Latin word pax, for peace. Why is the savior of the Christian religion, then, known as the Prince of Peace? It is without doubt that this is where the French word merci is derived, meaning thank you, since merci is cognate with mercy, which is alleviation of distress, and all of its roots go back to the same commercial terms that have to do with prices being paid and merchandise. Mercury is also known as Hermes, the messenger of the gods, whose symbol of the Hermetic caduceus remains the dominant symbol of the medical establishment. There are no accidents when it comes to the symbols of the world. None. This symbol shows the intertwined snakes representing the coiled strands of DNA, which cannot be fully comprehended until one understands that Hermes Mercury is also known as Wotan, Woden. From Wotan, Woden, we have been given the day of the week known as Wednesday or Woden's Day, which is the French mercredi. This Hermetic cross is the Woden or wooden cross that has always been alluded to in Christianity, that creates the crucifixion to be nailed to the cross. It is not a single savior that is nailed to the Woden cross of DNA, but every single individual that lives and dies, without exception. Life and death simply become reversible aspects of each other, and this cannot be denied in the slightest. As one lives, one dies. And through the law of exchange, as one dies, another must live. Deposits and withdrawals. This alone should be sufficient as a starting point to explain the aging process as related even on a scientific level to cellular division and thus regeneration. The great problem of modern science is that it believes and is convinced nearly everyone else that all of these genetic processes are unconscious and actuated simply through instinctual evolutionary motivation. This is a very unfortunate error in reasoning, regardless of how much microscopic observation has been accomplished thus far. The wooden cross found its correlation within the epic poem of Homer, the Iliad, as depicted in the metaphor of the wooden horse. Perhaps the quote from Manly P. Hall's Secret Teaching of All Ages can now enlighten one further regarding this allegory as it relates to birth and death. These new lives will come forth into the city of the earth and conquer the environment of those who are already within its borders by creating more competition and rivalry. Another great symbol of this is shown within the modern world when people go to the airport. The airplane is the new metaphor for the horse, and it is shaped exactly like a phallus to ensure the veracity of those who created the schematic. A person needs to go through the departure gate, which is the symbol of those who have died and are moving on to a new place. The rapture is, within the Christian theology, the aspect of certain believers who will be raptured or taken into heaven during the end times. This is absolutely correct, because death for each individual is the end times, whereby the spirit is siphoned upwards in ecstasy. Within this world, the symbol of the phallus plane takes the passengers' raptures up to heaven, which is in the clouds, exactly as most people have been trained to imagine what heaven looks like through the media and even cartoon depictions. The raptures stay in heaven for a while as they are delivered by the pilot who flies in the cockpit. Of course, it's called a cockpit because the plane is phallic-shaped, and the pilot is a phonetic play on words as alluding to the Roman curator Pilate that ordered the crucifixion of Jesus. It is imagined that for those hearing these words, that it will be difficult to not think of these aspects when inside of a plane alongside so many other passengers. Of course, one's time in heaven is not infinite in duration, and therefore, those who are being delivered will be brought down again through the fall, which eventually creates a release of those infinite potentialities into a new realm or area, where they will conquer the environment that they now find themselves in. The new competition for the environment are called the arrivals, which is exactly right. Arrivals are rivals, because a rival is someone that you are in competition with, but also someone that is your match. What better match than to pit man against man? The only actual mythology of man is that of cooperation, because the actuality of his and her existence is that of competition and rivalry with idealized personalities that are painted with the veneer of friendliness simply for the sake of individual advantage. The notions of love that are carried in the hearts of mankind still retain so much tribalism and separatist clauses to identify with familiarity over revelation, borders and restrictions over openness and inner emancipation. This level of thinking is the true darkness that exists in the world, and until it is expunged, there can be no progress beyond the physical material realm. Until then, the human race continues, and as with all races, the finish line is found at the start line. As directly told to us in the story of crucifixion, salvation is given after the death upon the cross of DNA, whereupon the Savior figure, which is the individual that has been crossed out, is thrown into the tomb behind the boulder for 3 days, thus indicating the 3 dark days of a new moon. Once the 3 days are completed, the boulder of the moon is rolled away to reveal the light of the resurrection or rebirth of a new consummation. The moon, woman's egg, is the David boat that provides salvation to those who are lost at sea, the sea men. The great mothership moon sends out countless numbers of David boats or tenders from each woman to create the withdrawals which forms the luck or light of the draw. To draw is to take something out and haul it away. From untold numbers of potential seeds, each David boat is usually only able to take on 1 passenger. Is the analogy becoming clear, or is it simply more convenient and comfortable to the mind to continue believing in the nonsense of scientific unconsciousness and evolutionary randomness? Death puts one on the bench to ride the pineal gland as a frozen asset in the winter of one's own existence. It is to be put below the 32nd degree, whereas salvation is to be brought above the 32nd and into the light or life of the 33rd, which is the reading of the Hermetic mercury thermostat above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The salvation happens at 33, where one takes their birth of off ice, as the definition of birth shows, meaning office. The exchange of life to death and death into life is completed. Mother thermo-heat manifests the situation of a new mental acquisition that is thought out. Heat is also correctly associated with light, since it is fire, electricity, that brings its light out, while cold is to be associated with darkness and the absence of light. The positive state of light and rejuvenation is therefore an aspect of the warm and light-filled months of spring and summer, while the negative states of decay and death find their symbolic union with the coldness of autumn and winter, black and white. Mercury represents the cure for death as an acquisition through the actions of commerce, as symbolically pointed out in the terminology, with the prefix of mercury, ultimately being rooted in the Proto-Indo-European language groups meaning die, while the suffix curie has no other choice but to be related to the same family as cure and also curry, which has an indication of haste, quickness, which is also what Mercury is known for throughout the mythology. Curry is a branch of courier, to further exemplify the point. Silence becomes time served, which is a sentence, and as the phonetic in the suffix of sentence suggests, it is the tense of time whereby one is crossed out. A cross is simply an X, and as everyone remembers in school, an X indicates an error, something that is wrong. A check mark is a correction, with check always pointing to a king, which is what check implies. A check mark is a king mark. Existence, or existence, since a cross bared means a sentence that is served versed, since these are anagrams of each other. The error being to take the sacredness of God and turn it into a profanity. The factions of commerce show this through the symbols of entrance and exit. It is noted when those who are in a trance-like state are moved towards these systems of trade, and once cashiered or discharged with dishonor, the customer is sent to the exit, which is a mark or indication that they have been X'd or crossed out. To exit is to exit. All of the transactions are noted and told to the record keepers of the ages, as shown by the fact that cashiers are also called tellers. A teller is a storyteller, a narrator, and a vote counter as well. The human consciousness defends its incorrect actions to maintain the system of commerce because it desires to keep and preserve its isolated individualism, which is the basis of personal advantage. Within this construct, cooperation is the illusion which is masked off by false personalities, while competition, envy, and leverage against other isolated individuals is the fact. As is so often referenced in argumentative fashion, the individual in society desires to maintain its competitive mindset because it is said that this is the driving force for progress and innovation, while any cooperation that might exist is only to cater towards the need to create a larger advantage towards competitive gains against others in a larger scope and context. Idealized cooperation is simply the temporary framing that masks the true heart of individual desire, which is to see one's personal island of opportunities grow as much as possible while conquering any who get in the way and do not serve one's own selfish and exclusive purposes. Consequently, the sentence of time, which is silence, becomes the law, which is dharma, as it indicates the correct way of living, but also means to hold or keep. The sentence ends once true religion is found, exactly as this word indicates. Religion means to bring together into unity that which was once separated. Yet the mind of man is so convoluted that it has twisted and interpreted this as something that is evil. Out of this convolution has sprung throughout the ages the multitudes of various pseudo-religions that each believes itself to be the genesis of all truth and salvation. Many talk of the need for spiritual transformation while touting the need for external salvation, all while ignoring that the only true salvation can come from within. A house temple divided against itself cannot stand. It will fall, and the individual creates the very template for his and her own self-destruction. Desire and attachment create the fight within oneself to constantly get away from where one is to where one wants to be, which is to cater to the realm of illusion. It is inner turmoil which creates an ionic discharge, because there is never satisfaction in where one is. Ion is from the root meaning to go for this reason, and is cognate with Isis. Isis represents the mother, which keeps the wards silent, which is very much the reason that every mother is also called a mum, because mum is an informal term for secrecy and silence, but also for a mother. Mummy and mummy, as already mentioned, are also correlate for the same esoteric reasons. Isolation creates an emptiness that tears into the very fabric of every individual's constitution. Is it not the general condition to fear loneliness? To seek out companionship in whatever form that it may be found, and thus quell that fear of being alone. Of course, companionship is not a cure for this fear, but only alleviation for as long as said company happens to be around. Once loneliness is the situation again, the same desire arises to be around others, which occurs through the same projected fears. This is experienced through various degrees in each individual, and taken back to the metaphor of the ocean, as each drop is a singular reflection of the whole. Whose image of this fear are we projecting? Or do we simply reiterate the adage that we feel disconnected from Source? If God at Source is an absolute aloneness, this would also mean that God at the root would be componentless, since components need relation to find their meaning, and this would therefore require separation. Since God at this state would be the epitome of completeness in a totally undivided state, there is zero room for comparison. God is therefore the thing in itself, incomparable, a single monad. No matter where God is, there God is. Through the contemplation of these ultimates, let us say that God wanted to make an attempt to get away from itself. The only plausible means to do this would be to create variations, and so perhaps the first one began. God divides the monad of itself, which becomes the creation of exact opposites. Again, a conundrum exists because where does the split begin from, or end up. Where does the division of eternity occur? Since limitlessness cannot be divided, one might infer that instead of a quantitative split, there would instead be a qualitative division. It seems that an illusion of sorts may have to be created, or the paradox itself is partitioned, and hence we now have the basis behind the ultimate symbol of black and white, otherwise known as good and evil. Can it be seen now that through this inference, the root of all causes can be neither God nor that opposing aspect called evil, but instead there is a third, undivided state which is the essence and source of all creation, since neither of these dualistic divisions can be the original. The implications of this are enormous, which is still an understatement. Unity is destroyed through diversity, which is now celebrated as uniqueness, regardless of how much mimicry is involved within every individual's existence. The more diversity, the more insensitivity there is towards unity, until the actions towards unification actually become discouraged altogether, which is why there is even competition at all. Competition cannot exist without comparison, which creates an adjudicative comparatition, which is laid upon a foundation of fear and contempt. This contempt manifests the envelopment of disrespect towards everything sacred, which becomes the profanity of the ages. They are called ages because anything that has its being inside of the ages does exactly that. It ages, and is therefore a part of the mortal coil which is ever seeking substantiation through the temporal. As a consequence of this, mortality is simply a never-ending reiteration of the principles of immortality, yet it never hinges onto the qualitative aspects that make immortality an actuality. Every individual is chasing after concepts and goals, which forever become the desires that incessantly need to be reconstituted, and thus creates a wheel, which is logarithmically the formation of time itself. Time, for this reason, ever moves in a circular fashion, with its endings always rooted back in the beginning. God has proven that God can never get away from itself, and every attempt only tests the limits and thresholds of pain. The human race, therefore, finishes its course where it began, and remains in the wheel of silence. The gods of Genesis, who sought to keep man silent, did so using very advanced principles of energy and vibration, which has been imbued through the mathematical scheme of linking every individual as a sine wave that is put out of phase. When two sounds are added together that are out of phase, the opposing pressures of each signal cancel each other out, resulting in complete silence. Every action in this reality is matched by an opposing action, so that no actual progress can be made. It is a perfect system of good versus evil, which is only possible through humanity's beloved competition principle. All technological advancements are only rendered as par for the course, since phase is measured in 360 degrees, which forms a circle, which is symbolically connected to the concept of the great year and therefore time. There is nothing new under the sun, since all supposed advancements have already been made during the last go-around. It is on these grounds that there is an ability to create so much contention and argument for the basis of why the system is good, and that we are truly advancing as a species, because 50% of it truly is good. There is a large percentage of people who enjoy the fruits and benefits of a life that is filled with pleasures and gratifications, and it is from this standpoint that individuals enjoying such benefits can argue until their very last breath that life is beautiful and just and wonderful. For those individuals, this cannot be refuted, because that is and has been their actual experience. Of course, a dualistic system holds the opposite phase too, as just mentioned, where there are those who suffer and live with discontent, pain, and all sorts of maladies, which can be said to make for a very sordid existence. This is the side that struggles for the contentment of the side that lives in ease, while both sides in their multitudinous degrees of good and bad cancel each other out, creating silence for the dimensions, a silence that is golden. The mind is the labyrinth which creates the endless chase after the components of time, which is worse than a fool's errand. A fool's errand that is ever desirous towards a future that can never be caught, directed from a past which can never be found, that are juxtaposed on either side of that which is closest to the truth as seen in the present. Despite the association that will undoubtedly be referenced by many to the commonly used cliché, the presents are presents, which is one's current state of being that is an unfortunate set of delayed and latent reactions towards the inevitable, since inevitability is a symptom of the temporal, while the evitable is not a tool found in the instrumentation of time. We mined for gold because that is what creates the silence of time, which is but a transient liberty that is wasted more often than not. The ending of time, and thus immortality, is found only when the mind itself is undivided, and this is only possible when the heart has found its correction.
I want to tell you about the universe. What it is, how it came to be, what its building blocks are. I want to tell you how the future creates the past, which then creates the future. But first, I want to tell you about crystals. You might be surprised to know that a crystal isn't an expensive piece of glass or a chandelier in some fancy dining room. The word crystal simply means a pattern that is periodic. Look at this checkerboard pattern. See how it continues to spread out infinitely in each direction? That means it's a periodic pattern. So that's a two-dimensional crystal. This is another two-dimensional crystal. And this is another. You can also have three-dimensional crystals. By the way, this 3D glass is called crystal because its atoms are actually arranged in a crystalline pattern. So, see how I'm projecting this three-dimensional crystal to a two-dimensional image on the sand? See how the 2D projection looks distorted because of the angle of the projection? That 2D image also has a pattern, but it isn't periodic. So, it's not a crystal. But there's a deep connection between the 2D object on the sand and the 3D mother crystal. This distorted 2D pattern is called a quasicrystal. A quasicrystal in a certain dimension, in this case 2D, is a projection of a crystal in a higher dimension, in this case 3D. A group of physicists in Los Angeles is working on a new physics theory where a particular 8D crystal, yep, that's right, an 8-dimensional crystal, is projected to 4D at a very particular angle, which forms a 4D quasicrystal. And from this 4D quasicrystal, they derive a 3D quasicrystal, which they believe is the fundamental substructure of all of reality. This 3D quasicrystal has a fundamental building block, a tetrahedron, which is a three-dimensional equilateral triangle. The size of each edge on this shape is the smallest possible length that can exist. This is called the Planck length. It's 10 to the 35 times smaller than a meter. So you know how your TV screen is broken down into building blocks called pixels? A pixel is the smallest possible indivisible unit of the 2D screen. So think of reality as your TV screen, but in 3D. And think of the tetrahedron as a 3D pixel, the smallest possible indivisible unit of reality. The tetrahedra in the quasicrystal combine with other tetrahedra, using complex mathematical rules, to fill up all of the space in the universe. Each tetrahedron only has a few specific states in which it can exist at any given moment. And because of the rules of how these pixels connect to each other, if one tetrahedron is in a certain state, this dictates the states of many other tetrahedra throughout all of space. But here's the weird thing. If a certain tetrahedron can be in any one of just a few possible states in a given moment, who or what chooses the state it should be in at any given moment? Well, for such a choice to be made, we need to scientifically, mathematically, and logically bring in a new element into physics. And that element is consciousness. If you're not a scientist, you might be surprised to learn that nobody actually knows the exact value of the speed of light. We have a close approximation, but not the exact value. The closest we can get to measuring it has to do with the precision of our machines. But no matter how precise our machines get, we will never be able to measure the exact speed of light without a theory that tells us what it is and why it is. And none of the current physics theories do that. Oh, look, Professor Einstein, you look so cute.
So I look pretty here?
Yes, yes.
No, wait, that's my bad side. But if I go...
Ja, das ist gut.
What if I stick up my tongue like this? Bah!
Sehr gut.
Oh.
Our best physics theories, Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, both use the speed of light as a starting point. In other words, they use an inexact measurement of the speed of light without explaining why it is, what it is, or why the universe even has a speed limit in the first place. We need a new theory. And such a theory is what the physicists and mathematicians of quantum gravity research in Los Angeles are working on. They call it emergence theory, and it will, really for the first time ever, provide an explanation for the speed of light and the other constants, such as Planck's constant and the fine structure constant. Basically, what is needed is a theory of everything, a theory that explains the very fundamental aspects of reality. String theory, which once held a lot of promise for possibly being a successful theory of everything, has not made any successful predictions. And regardless of predictions, the theory itself isn't actually a theory of everything. It's just not, because it can't explain the speed of light or the other constants. Quantum mechanics and general relativity, on the other hand, do make good predictions, but they don't explain the fundamental constants either.
Professor Einstein, why does the speed of light have the exact value that it does?
Well, to put it plainly, security!
So what clues does nature offer us for what a theory of everything should look like? We've identified 7. Information, causality loops, non-determinism, consciousness, pixelation, E8 crystal, and the golden ratio. A growing number of physicists are saying reality is made of information. What does that even mean? Well, information is meaning in the form of symbolism. A language or code provide this kind of information conveying symbolism. A very different type of symbol is one that represents itself. Geometric symbols can do that. A cube can represent love, if we say it does, or it can represent, really with minimal subjectivity, itself. Could there be a language or code made out of geometry? What type of information would such a language express? Quantum physics theory and classical physics indicate that reality is made of information, and there is no evidence that reality is made of anything other than information. Many physicists agree with this, and many don't. But those that don't agree that reality is made of information have no explanation for what reality is, if it's not information. Gentlemen?
Reality is made of information.
Nope.
Yes, it is made of information.
No.
Okay, so what is it made of if not information?
Energy.
Energy is information.
That's stupid.
Energy is the potential for a particle to change its position. Potential is information. Energy is information.
No.
It's information. Then what is it?
Not information.
And what is it?
Not information.
Geometric. A geometric language in the form of geometric symbolism, the type of symbols that represent themselves, might explain how a geometric reality can be made of pure information. Information implies meaning. But what is meaning? Meaning is a comparison. That's what we do. But we do it so fast, we don't realize we're doing it. We look at something and we match it to something from our database. We say, that is a crosswalk. That is a building, not a crosswalk. That is a window, not a building. So meaning is the perception of something relative to something else. So therefore, meaning is subjective and requires choice. Can we get some dramatic music here? Because meaning is subjective, for it to even exist, it needs to be perceived or measured by some form of consciousness. Einstein showed how the past and the future exist simultaneously in one geometric object. So all time exists all the time. Let me say that again. All time exists all the time. I know that sounds kind of weird and unintuitive, but we have to kind of suspend our common sense. And accept that mathematically, and according to the best physics formulas we have, that actually makes sense. So, let's visualize the geometric object that Einstein spoke about as a block. Remember the tetrahedra, the building block pixels of reality I told you about? Now imagine the entire universe, everything, everywhere, in one frozen moment in time. Like a single frame in a movie. In this one frame, all of reality everywhere appears frozen in this one position. Let me give you an analogy. In a movie shot on 35mm film, there are 24 frames a second. There's no actual movement in a movie. There's just a sequence of frozen frames. Now remember how I told you about the Planck length of space, which is the smallest length possible? Well, there is also a Planck length of time, and it is much shorter than 24 frames a second. In fact, it's 10 to the 44 times shorter than a second. Okay, so back to our frozen frame of reality. The entire universe in one frozen moment, one frame. But instead of a frame in a movie, it's a frame in all of reality. Now, imagine the next frame. Each frame is different from the previous one, just like in a movie. See how all frames exist in Einstein's space-time all at once? Okay, now here's where things get really, really weird. We assume that the past influences the future. That's how we appear to experience reality. But when you look at this block, why would one side be the past and one side be the future? Why go left to right and not right to left? Why can't the future influence the past? Take away the names past and future if that helps you think of this concept. So what if the past influences the future and the future influences the past in an endless feedback loop? So then, the question is, which part of the past is influencing which part of the future and vice versa? And the answer is, all time is affecting all time, all the time.
Hi, I need a drink.
Is this even possible? Can me 20 years from now influence me now? Just as I influence her? So can me 5 minutes from now influence me 10 minutes ago, just as me 10 minutes ago influences me as a baby, just as me as a baby influences me on my deathbed? This is too weird to even grasp. But everything we know says this is the way it is. Am I stoned? Okay, so if every moment is co-creating every other moment, both forward and backward in time, then reality would be this massive neural network spanning space and time. This type of network would have one even way stranger quality than anything we've talked about so far. It would be its own creator. But the fact that all time exists all the time does not mean that the future is written in stone, and we're some kind of programmed animation or something. That's what they used to believe, though. Years ago, it was popular to believe in the somewhat bummer idea of reality being a deterministic program playing itself out.
Light is scattered by electrons and is bounced off electrons.
The famous double-slit experiment ruled out determinism. Look it up if you've never heard of it. It's wild and is one of the cornerstones of modern physics. But for now, take my word for it. It ruled out determinism and ushered in a new era of non-determinism, or basically, free will. So, how does free will work? One of the most surprising discoveries of quantum physics is that reality only exists when it is observed. That literally, particles do not exist until they are observed. Famous physicist John Wheeler, he's the guy who came up with the term black hole, says that reality is made of information, which is created by observation. The observation must be made, he says, by something conscious. And Nobel Prize winner Frank Wilczek said that quantum theory is contentious and obscure, and that it will remain that way until someone constructs, within the formalism of quantum mechanics, an observer, a model entity whose states correspond to a recognizable caricature of conscious awareness. An entity, an observer. So Frank Wilczek is basically talking about an entity, not necessarily a human being or an animal, that is capable of generating information by observing and measuring. But what would that conscious entity be? Well, we definitely know that consciousness exists in the universe. I mean, at least in us humans, right? I mean, I'm conscious, you're conscious, he's conscious, I think.
I'm conscious. I'm conscious.
Consciousness relates deeply to physics in ways not yet fully understood. In fact, consciousness is kind of like one of the least understood things in all of science. Nobody knows exactly what it is. Weird, right? So if reality is pure information, if everything, energy, matter, thought, if it's all information, then it becomes clear that reality deeply ties into consciousness in some way, as if the fundamental stuff of reality is somehow consciousness. Did consciousness and information somehow emerge in a causality feedback loop? German physicist Werner Heisenberg developed the first equations of quantum mechanics using a type of math called matrix theory. He deduced that space and time were pixelated into indivisible three-dimensional Planck length units, just like the two-dimensional pixels on your computer screen.
It's good to be made of pixels.
The mathematics indicated this.
Mathematics. I love mathematics.
Your pizza, Professor.
And pizza. Oh, I love pizza. Especially pixelated pizza.
And interestingly, there was no solid experimental evidence for smooth, in other words, not pixelated, space-time.
Pizza.
Not pixelated! Not pixelated! Pixelated!
We are not pixelated.
Not pixelated!
Yes, you are, morons.
Your mother is pixelated!
This is smooth.
There is no evidence of that. And the mathematics show it is pixelated, so it must be pixelated.
Oh, that's interesting. Bullshit.
It must be pixelated.
Bullshit, 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 bullshit.
On the other hand, most scientists agree that a length can be no shorter than the Planck length, which suggests reality is pixelated.
There is no length shorter than the Planck length.
That means reality is pixelated.
I'm not pixelated. I'm not.
Dude, you're kind of being a little like one of those people who deny evolution because they can't handle the fact their ancestors were monkeys. Are you a monkey? Huh? Are you a little monkey?
We believe that until a quantum gravity theory of pixelated spacetime is discovered, the issue will remain confusing for everyone. What type of geometric code would describe a pixelated reality? 80 years of smashing particles together in particle accelerators, such as the famous Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, have given us a strange clue that all the fundamental particles and forces convert into one another. Like they literally transform from one to the other, according to a process called gauge symmetry transformation. And all of these conversions correspond to a shape. And not just any shape, an 8-dimensional shape. Now this shape forms a crystal. Now remember, crystals are periodic patterns of a certain shape. Like that checkerboard is a 2D crystal made up of squares. So this crystal is of a particular 8-dimensional shape. And this crystal is known as the E8 lattice. To generate that 3D quasicrystal, the substructure at the pixelated fabric of reality, we project this 8D crystal to to 4D. And then we convert that to 3D. Now, just like the basic cell shape of the 3D cubic lattice is the cube, the cell shape of the E8 lattice is an 8D shape with 240 vertices. We call it the Gaussian polytope. When the Gaussian polytope is projected to 4D, it becomes two identical shapes of different sizes. The ratio of their sizes is a unique number, 0.618, also known as the golden ratio. The golden ratio may be the fundamental constant of nature. It is a ratio that is fundamental to circumscribed equilateral triangles, and it's weirdly ubiquitous in the universe, appearing everywhere from the quantum to celestial scales. Ever so interestingly, it appears in black holes.
I don't want to fly into a black hole. I wish I never realized your existence.
Okay, let's get serious for a second. Here are 3 quick facts for you science heads. The golden ratio is the precise point where a black hole's modified specific heat changes from positive to negative. And it is part of the equation for the lower bound on black hole entropy. The golden ratio even relates the loop quantum gravity parameter to black hole entropy. Why does this support the claim that the golden ratio is the fundamental constant of nature? Because a theory of everything must unite general relativity with quantum mechanics, and a black hole is where these two theories converge at their limits. Okay, so bear with me through some really weird math right now, and I'll reward you with some amazing footage of John Malkovich getting a pie in the face. There's a type of mathematics called matrix mathematics. No, not that type of matrix. Matrix math is the type of math that quantum physics uses in its formulas. Without getting too technical, this is an example of a matrix. A matrix is just a group of numbers that are arranged in columns and rows. And there's a certain amount of combinations for these numbers inside the matrix. Like if a matrix has 4 numbers inside it, there are 24 different possible combinations for those 4 numbers. Quantum mechanics uses matrices that are binary, so they only contain various combinations of 2 numbers. Each of these combinations of numbers has a value. It's called an eigenvalue. Some eigenvalues are called trivial. These are values like 1, 2, and 0. And some are called non-trivial, and those are all sorts of more complex-looking numbers. So, here's the interesting part. Where's that interesting part? Oh, yes, here. The highest probability non-trivial eigenvalues that show up in binary matrices are, ready for this, the golden ratio and -1 over the golden ratio. So we now see a deep link between black holes and quantum mechanics, because the golden ratio appears deeply in both black hole physics and in quantum mechanics. Okay. Good job bearing with me. So, here's your reward. John Malkovich getting a pie in the face.
No, I don't want, no. But I'm not John Malkovich.
Pie! The golden ratio appears to startling accuracies in many other ways throughout the universe, in scales both large and small. It is so prevalent that its existence simply cannot be looked at as coincidental. In the past, the appearance of this ratio has usually been ignored by scientists because they had no way to explain it. So interest in it was considered the stuff of amateur scientists. But now, for the first time, a rigorous quantum gravity theory is being developed, which predicts the golden ratio's existence, literally, everywhere. So what would a theory of everything look like that answers these 7 clues we just presented? Information, causality loops, non-determinism, consciousness, pixelation, E8 crystal, and the golden ratio.
So we think reality is a mosaic-like code or language at the smallest scale of reality possible, which is called the Planck length. Particle accelerator data tells us that all particles and forces relate to one another according to a higher dimensional crystal called the E8 lattice. But reality appears to be 3D. So we project a slice of this E8 crystal down to 3D, which produces a quasi-crystal code or language. And that allows these geometric symbols to build up to the ordinary world of particles and forces that we see around us. Now, this geometric language has rules, but it also has syntactical freedom like any language. And that requires some notion of a chooser to choose the free steps in the language. Now, the notion of randomness doesn't work so well when it comes to codes because meaning starts to break down. Besides, there's no decent experimental evidence for randomness in nature in the first place. A universal collective consciousness is one answer, but that sounds New Age and religious. Now, nowadays, a good number of physicists discuss the idea that our whole universe is actually a code-based simulation in some fantastically powerful quantum computer in another universe. Now, if true, then by the same logic, that other universe where the computer running the simulation of our universe would also supposedly be a simulation in another universe. So the idea is a little shaky, but it's being discussed seriously by a lot of credible people. But it turns out that a universal collective-like consciousness of some sort may be physically inevitable. Now, we don't need to anthropomorphize this idea or make it religious or spiritual. To follow why, let us start with the idea of the collective behavior of cells in your body, each a single-celled microbe living its life. A long time ago, only this sort of cellular life form existed here on Earth. These little guys were not too smart, but they did choose what direction to swim and could chase nutrients, reproduce, and run from dangerous things. They made choices with their very simple systems of environmental awareness and desire to survive. Then they self-organized into colonies that were smarter as a group and had more environmental awareness than the individuals. Eventually, animals such as humans emerged. Sophisticated forms of awareness and consciousness now float on an ocean of 37 trillion living cells, self-organized as a human being. It is specifically the laws of physics that caused electrons and quarks to self-organize into 81 stable atoms, and from there, into human consciousness. And physics places no upper limit on the amount of energy and matter that can self-organize into conscious systems.
Physics allows the possibility of all the energy in the universe to eventually convert into a single conscious system that is itself a network of other conscious systems, a massive, technologically based collective consciousness. Given enough time, anything that can happen will eventually happen. By this axiom, this system of universal consciousness has already emerged somewhere in the frames of space-time ahead of us. Because it is possible, it is inevitable. In fact, according to the evidence of retrocausality time loops, that inevitable future is co-creating us right now, just as we are co-creating it. When humanity discovers the theory of everything, it will usher in a new age of prosperity. For example, clean, cheap energy, leading to the eventual elimination of poverty. As a nonprofit, Quantum Gravity Research relies on crowdfunding to support our scientific progress. Even a $5 donation is meaningful and moves this mission forward. To participate in the adventure, visit quantumgravityresearch.org and click on Support Our Work.
ceased.